Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. You are tuned in to another edition of Leica Stories. Today we are speaking with photographer Jesse Marlow. Jesse, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Derek. Good to be here.
It's great to have you on. You're normally all the way, I was going to say halfway across the world. You're normally all the way across the world. We have you here in the States now. Where are you coming to us from?
Coming from Melbourne, Australia. Oh, well, now I'm actually in Miami. So I've been here for the last 6 days. I came over for a workshop with the Leica Academy, and that was on over the weekend down here in Miami, and it was great.
Awesome. What's it like from a Leica Academy perspective? Does that differ in regards to when you're going out by yourself? What's the experience like? I haven't been to a Leica Academy class. I do know some Leica Academy instructors, and I've never asked them. So I got to ask you now, what's the experience like with a Leica Academy course?
Yeah, well, I do a lot of workshops back in Australia with the Academy, and probably the last maybe 5 years I've been coming over to the States and doing them. I've done a couple in LA and Chicago and New York, and this time it was over in Miami. So yeah, it's been wonderful. And it's always great to to get out there and meet people from different countries. And I think that's really part of it. The part of it that I love, just being able to sort of travel and share my knowledge and experience and work with with new participants and help them with their work.
Definitely. Well, I want to take this time to thank Leica, of course, for hosting this incredible series and introducing us to photographers like Jesse. We're talking about traveling all over the world. What's the best city you photographed in?
Oh, that's a tough question, but I think I love Berlin. I've been to Berlin a few times over the years and done a lot of work over there, and that's always it's always calling me back. I first went there 20 years ago, and I've been back every probably 5 years since for some work for myself. And then I think New York's another favorite spot. It's just a mecca of street photography. So that's a spot that I always enjoy traveling to. And then Hanoi in Vietnam is another spot. So they're probably my top three.
Interesting. I always love to get the perspective of foreign photographers in regards to New York. Me being a street photographer based in New York, of course, I'm over it and I need to travel and I need to see more cities. But for you, what is New York? When you come, I think every city has its own DNA. Every city has its own feel. What is New York for you? Like when you think about photographing in New York, what is it about for you?
Well, I think, first and foremost, it's the sheer size of the city and, the buildings and the street corners and the busyness. And yeah, there's a lot of street photographers there. I think last time I was there, I sort of, walked out of my hotel, and in the first, 150 meters, I think I'd seen three people with Leicas walking past me and out there sort of pounding the pavement. So I think, I always sort of consider it to be, I suppose one of the big sort of main spots for this sort of work. But it's for me, I suppose what I try to do with some of my work is sort of get off those main streets and look for the quieter moments away from the busyness. And I like, last time I was there, I was sort of over in Brooklyn a fair bit and shooting over there, and really enjoyed that. I hung out with Matt Weber, who's a photographer friend, and he showed me a few spots over there, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Weber's a great dude, a legend in his own right. For your style, I told you this the other day when we spoke. One of the things that really jumps out is just the way you see things. I think a truly gifted photographer is able to take just everyday things that most normal people walk by. And not only do you notice it, but you're able to capture it in a way that brings the viewer there. Like I look at some of your images and I'm just like, man, I would have walked right by that. And not only do you see it, but it's that translation of taking that regular moment and turning it into something beautiful to look at. Because there's many times that we see it, but we're not able to translate it through photography. How do you see, what's your approach like? Are you trying to take the viewer there, or is it really just you're just out there looking, doing your thing?
It's probably a combination. I think being from Melbourne, is my hometown. It's where I've lived my whole life. It's a city that's not, it doesn't have any sort of, great landmarks, or the light there is not like Sydney's light, which is pretty amazing. Melbourne, you've got to look for your pictures a bit more. So I think having having that as my hometown has probably made me and forced me to sort of, explore it a bit more and look for things within things. And I think I've then just been able to kind of, maybe with the influence of wanting to be a graphic designer as a teenager and growing up around my mum, who's a fashion designer. So I'd hang out at her studio a lot. And as a young sort of boy and teenager, I'd sort of see, a lot of the fabrics that she was using for her designs. And I think that kind of then, rubbed off on me and influenced the way I looked for color. And then I think it's probably the last 10 to 15 years that I've really tried to get a bit more abstract with what I look for when I'm out on the street and try and find a new take on some of these, like you said, these things that you walk past a lot of the time and don't notice. So yeah, that's kind of a combination of those three things, I think, kind of sum up my overall approach.
The designer mother, now it all makes sense. Because I would look at your work and it's color, it's texture, it's shapes. It's almost like you have some of your images have like this collage effect where you have things that the way you see different textures and patterns come together, but at the same time, there's like this geometric composition that I see things very similar in a certain regard. You do it way better than me. I'm gonna have to take notes from you, but it's the way that you'll put together things that, like I said, there's a pattern and a texture that don't normally match, but you make it all match and you make everything come together. And then, we're going to look at some images in a bit. It'll probably make a little bit more sense when we have a visual, cue to look at. But is that just the way you see? What are you looking for when you go out? Do you go out with anything in particular in mind? Or are you just going out and observing?
I try to keep a really open mind and not be too sort of, set in what I'm looking for. And I think that then helps me, I suppose, find a variety of different things. And then a lot of the time when I do come across, say, an interesting wall or a pattern, it then becomes the challenge to try and sort of piece together the picture. And I think when I suppose the three main things for me out on the street are sort of color, like a graphic element sometimes, as well as people. And when all three kind of come together and work in a picture, that's when I get to work. And a lot of the time it doesn't happen. You might have two elements that sort of work and you're sort of waiting for that third one to happen and it doesn't happen and you walk off or drive off thinking I just wasted 15 minutes. But when it does happen, it sort of, it makes you sort of walk off feeling like, it was really worthwhile.
How do you handle, there's always that challenge of being married to an image that doesn't have those three. You talk about, I think every photographer has like their 2, 3, 4 things that it's like, okay, when I have 4, that's the perfect image. If I have 3, I really love it, but maybe I shouldn't put it out. 2, close but no cigar, and 1, cutting room floor. How do you decide what's an image that's going to be out there? Or, do you have a system where it's like, okay, I really love this image, but is it a great image? Or yes, this image should be seen.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it just sort of comes down to, I suppose, pictures that, you may put out on Instagram from, being away for a week over here in Miami versus pictures that then end up in a book or an exhibition. And I think that's the challenge. And that's one of the things I talk to people about on workshops that, once you've got that, 2 or 3 key images and you're starting off, you sort of build from that. So I think when I'm working on a long-term body of work, I'm working on these books and bodies of work for sort of, 9, 10 years before the final book's out. So I suppose the elimination process along that period of time takes place and pictures just, get replaced by other pictures that are, stronger or, like you said, with more elements that kind of combine the main things that I'm looking for. So it's a kind of a natural, I think, to sum it up, it's like a natural sort of elimination process that, you end up with your best pictures in books and exhibitions. And, using Instagram that I use a fair bit is more of it's almost like a scrapbook just to sort of put some pictures out there and, just have a bit of fun with it, a bit looser.
Yeah, I was interested to see what your take on that was, because a heavy part of, your body of work is published work. It's exhibits, it's actual books. Instagram, it's always interesting to see how photographers are using Instagram whether it's to their advantage in a business perspective, or whether it's just like, hey, I just want to throw some stuff out and get it out into the ether. What's your approach to Instagram?
Uh, well, I've been using it. I was pretty slow to sort of start using it. I wasn't in that sort of first wave of photographers that got on it, and I think for me, it's obviously it's a tool, and it's a really important tool that's part of my practice, but it's not the sort of the main driver. It's not something that I'm not feeding it every day with pictures, and I'm not feeling that need to do that. So I think that sort of suits me and my approach. I think, for me, I was lucky enough to sort of, be, I started shooting in the sort of the late or sort of mid 90s, and that was all sort of film, and sort of the idea was sort of publishing books and exhibiting. So I think, it's, for me, it's all about sort of having that foundation and a variety of different, outlets for my work, rather than just being reliant on one. I think that's been sort of what's worked for me.
What's You've been successful with the publishing alone, man. It's like, it's so hard to get into it, and so many people aspire to it. Is it something that you always aspire to? Was publishing the way to go, whether it's exhibits or books? Was that always on the table?
Yeah, I was really lucky when I was at photography school back in 1997. I had a lecturer who was really sort of into the photo book, and I remember him showing me Alex Webb's book, and books by Cartier-Bresson and Joseph Kudelka, and he would sort of drum into us that it was all about the book and the exhibition as well. So I think having that as a backbone, and it sort of, and I suppose what that did for me was really kind of pushed me and inspired me to sort of get my work out there. And I think, I remember back when I published my first book it was 2003. And I remember, back then I was, sort of early 20s, and, like a lot of other young photographers, you're trying to get your work out there. And this was sort of before Instagram. So you had to sort of get creative and look at ways of getting your name out there and getting your work out there. So publishing books seemed like the logical way of doing it. So, and I remember that period of when I did get that first book published, knocking on doors of galleries or ad agencies or design firms looking for commercial work, having that book out there, it just meant people took me a bit more seriously. So it was a really kind of crucial step in my development as a photographer to try and get work out there, in the book form. And it's something that I've just continued to do ever since.
Has your process changed in approach to publishing and books from when you've started? How has that kind of progressed? I know it's not easy. It sounds like it's easy, especially now in the days of self-publishing. Everybody's putting a book out. But what is it like? What's the process been like, the change for you, and how you're approaching a project that you then foresee going to publishing?
Yeah, so every book I've done has pretty much been self-published or self-funded. So even the first book, I had a distributor for it, but I raised the money to produce it by finding some sponsors for it. And then the books that I've produced ever since have been similar, that I've essentially self-published them. And it's just, for me, that way I'm sort of in control of everything. And I'm a bit of a control freak when it comes to my work. And I think it's important to sort of have that, I suppose, want to sort of, you want, once that book's out there, it's final. It's, it's done. So I think, being a control freak is a good thing with your work, and from being on press with printing it to working with graphic designers that you're aligned with. I think the more you can sort of do as a creative and photographer with your own work going into a book, it's only going to help it.
Totally. I mean, any control you relinquish, especially in terms of creative projects. I know I struggle with that. A lot of photographers out there struggle with, how much control do I concede, and in what ways? Like, where do I give up? Do I give it to somebody to curate, or to look at and pull images out, or change how it's put together? So you're controlling every aspect of that, and then just working with, is it like, for the graphic design, or what control are you giving up, if any?
Yeah, I mean, each book's been slightly different. The first one was, a book about Indigenous footballers from Australia, from the outback. And with that one, that was, there was a few different layers to that book in terms of what the work was about and the story it was trying to tell. And then the second book that I produced was a book of it was a book called Wounded. It was a commercial disaster. It didn't sell many copies, but it won a few awards over in England as a design sort of concept piece. So that was a book that I was approached by this young design firm that was starting off, that had seen the work, and that, I suppose, I kind of handed the work over with that one, and I trusted them, and I just said, go crazy, and they did, and it ended up sort of being really successful on that front. And then the books that I've done since have been, I've probably, I've had total control of, in terms of, choosing the paper stock through to the thickness of the cardboard in the hardback, through to the cloth, and being on press. And, one book I flew over to China to be on press while it was printed. Other books I've had printed in Melbourne, and I've been there for, the 3 days while it's being printed, and gone out to the bindery as the book sort of gets bound. So yeah, I like to be in full control of my work. Having said that, I'm working on a book with a small publisher next year, which I thought, it was probably a good time to sort of work with someone else and see how another publisher sort of does things. So that's going to be a little bit of a change, and I think it's good to sort of mix it up as well.
You're prepping yourself to jump into that world. It's like, man, it's all good until you hit that first roadblock, and you got to kind of work through it and see. Because I mean, you've been doing this a long time. You're set in your ways, right? You know what you like and what you want to see.
Yeah, and with this particular work, it's the sort of the earlier work that we'll see in a minute. It's when I sort of had this idea for the book, I had this kind of grand idea of doing it as a hardback, and making the pictures quite big. And I caught up with the publisher and designer, and their concept was completely different. And I sort of walked out of that meeting thinking, yeah, didn't sort of fit what I had in mind. And then I got home and I thought about it for a few days, and then I thought, actually, what they were coming up with really suited that period of work and those photos. So I think, yeah, it is nice to sort of to work with designers that have got strong ideas as well, and that can really then rub off on the work and the overall book.
What's the idea of success behind a book? I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking there's so many things at play that we don't think about. You want to obviously put the best work in there, but then you get down to, well, you talked earlier when the book wasn't a major commercial success. It's like, okay, well, how much does that factor into how you view the overall success? Is it really about the work that you're putting out? Is it about, how the book is received? What do you see as a successful body of work?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of different things, and each, like I said earlier, each book that I've done has been about a different kind of either period of my work or topic. And so for the work that I've been doing the last 20 years, the sort of the street stuff, that for me, that the book's getting that work out there and kind of closing off a body of work, and knowing when it's finished, and then turning it into the book, and then seeing the work kind of live on. Like, I think that's for me, that's really important. So even being over in Miami this week and having copies of my book at the bookstore, at the Leica store, and seeing people sort of buying copies and really sort of giving me nice feedback about it. That, I suppose, for me, that's the ultimate, to sort of see it kind of live on even 10 years after it's first published and then republished. So each one's been slightly different for the reasons and the reasons they may have been successful, or in the case of the Wounded book, unsuccessful commercially.
Well, and I know you've probably heard this a million times. When do you know a project's done? Do you just know, or is there?
Yeah, that's another tough question. I think with the Wounded series, that was a book that I just, for that 2-year period, that was all I kind of looked for when I was out on the street. So what I found with that was that I was kind of missing other photos, because I'd become so kind of fixated on this one topic out on the street. And then with the other work, so the color work, the sort of the work in that is a lot looser. It's more just a a combination of single pictures that are kind of linked together through color and design and the decisive moment and these sorts of things. So I think how do you know when a body of work's finished? It can be a few different ways. Sometimes you can just be done with the series and you're not feeling it anymore. And then you may sit on the work for a while and then look at publishing opportunities, and then other times they might be linked to an event or an exhibition that you've got lined up. So it's once again, it's just a combination of kind of different approaches and finding a reason for each body of work, for getting it out there.
And for people like me, it's like, man, I can't even get off a go. It's so many. I'm looking through your projects and your books, and it's like you always have ideas generated. You're always being able to take things and put them in a cohesive manner. And I think that's one of the things that makes or breaks publishing at that point, especially if you're going to go through a publisher. You can't just say, hey, I'm a street photographer. Here's a bunch of random street images. They want to see a storyline. And I think the same holds true even if you're going to self-publish. Why are people going to look at this body of work? They want to see something that has a cohesive idea form. Do you think there is a place for, you look at Matt Weber, right? We both know Matt Weber. Matt's got a bunch of books out.
Bunch of books.
And it's always, he's got his theme stuff. And even when it's just general street photography, there still is a common theme. Do you see that as absolutely necessary for someone who's going to publish a body of work?
Do you mean having like a continuous
having like a cohesive theme?
I think once again, I think it sort of just depends on it might be sort of linked together by a period of time, or if it's a themed body of work, I think that's when it can work. Or if it's a collection of random images, which essentially my sort of last book, or the yellow book, Don't Just Tell Them, Show Them, that's what that is. It's a collection of 50 pictures taken over a 10-year period, and they're photographed from all over the world in mostly Melbourne, but different parts of Europe and some from America. And I think what then sort of brings them together and holds the book and the work and the series together is those themes that might sort of run through it. So for me, over that period of time, I was looking at, I'm still looking at color and graphics, and, every photo is horizontal. So there's a sort of a, visual consistency that runs through the body of work, even though they're all kind of just standalone images. So you hope that the viewer, as they sort of go through the book, starts to see this, this consistency, and that's been my approach with that work.
Now, how has your body of work changed? I mean, as we change as people, we progress, we go through different things. Life throws a ton of experiences at us that change us as people. How has that shaped your work as a photographer? Do you see things the same way you saw them 2 decades ago? Do you approach photography any differently?
Yeah, I think when I was younger, I was probably going out into the city a lot, and I was, going off and spending, blocks of time shooting and trying to sort of be really productive in a, I suppose, in a strike rate kind of way. Like you sort of knew that, you had Tuesday and Wednesday off. You'd go to the city and you'd be shooting for 6-7 hours and just, filling up a bag of film and then getting it processed. And then I think my approach and style kind of changed probably about 13, 14 years ago when I had kids. And, when stuff like that happens, your approach changes. You can't be out, standing on that street corner or walking around the city for half a day. So I think what happened to me was my work evolved, and I then just sort of, I suppose, started, approaching it a bit more organically and just, having my camera with me wherever I went, which is what I'd always done. But, where I was going was changing, and I was, getting in the car and going for drives and exploring different parts of the city or different parts of Melbourne, and just kind of like living my life and having my camera with me, and then letting things come to me a bit more rather than, forcing it and setting aside blocks of time. Because I think when you start doing that with this sort of work, you can go off into the city and be determined to take photos one day, and then you just may not be feeling it, or you might have an idea to go in there and shoot strong light, and then the sun goes down, and you're not sort of, I suppose, shooting the sort of pictures that you'd gone to take. So I think by sort of removing that pressure and expectation was a really important thing for me and the evolution of my work, and it's sort of freed me up a bit just to just live my life and just go from A to B and see things along the way.
Yeah, that lack of pressure and not putting certain restrictions on yourself as a photographer and feeling like you have to create a certain body work, or if you're going out and feeling like, okay, the light changes, I
Yeah.
can't create the same kind of work. Now, you mentioned becoming a father, and that was such a change in me and the way I looked at photography was becoming a father. And I look at now where it's like I'm less inclined to go photograph what's going on out in the street. And maybe it's because I have a 6-year-old. So it's still, I'm still in the early stages of
Yeah.
being a father. He doesn't hate me yet. But, you know, I want to spend that time documenting his life. And I've worked him, worked his life into my street work when I do. What images mean the most to you? Being a father, being a street photographer, being a published photographer, what are the images that you find yourself most drawn to and attached to?
I don't take a lot of photos. I mean, I do take photos of my kids, but I've never sort of, started a kind of like a big body of work about them. I've just let them kind of grow up and without sort of having their dad kind of, shoot them too much. So I suppose, when I sort of think back to photos that, I sort of hold closest to my heart, they're pictures where I suppose I've sort of been able to kind of solve a visual puzzle while it's kind of happened in front of me. And, I suppose there's probably, some pictures which we'll see a bit later on where I've been, lucky enough to be able to do it, and it's all worked out, and, I've walked off being happy and content. And then there's other pictures that have been the complete opposite, where something completely random's happened, and, it's just about timing, or that little bit of luck that we have as street photographers sometimes that makes it worthwhile. So I think it's probably both those pictures where you do get lucky and something aligns that you hadn't seen or you had seen, and then those photos where you really kind of labor over the composition. And that's probably where the work's gone in the last 5 years for me. I've sort of become a little bit just really sort of fixated on getting it right in camera and, walking off and knowing I've got it.
It's like that fist pump of like,
Yeah.
oh, that hard work.
Yeah.
I think everybody requires a little luck. You can be great. You can see the world great, but it's luck, it's preparation, a little bit of everything. And when it all comes together, that serendipitous moment, the Cartier-Bresson decisive moment, it's like, it's rewarding.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, but that all being said, I could not wait to get to some of these images. Jesse, since you sent me these, I had told you before we went live today that I've been in a little bit of a down slump, and looking at your images has made me want to pick my camera up again and go back out into the streets. The way you see things, even, I had sent your images to my boss, and my boss was like, even like your bio image. It's like, it's just amazing the way you see things and the way you control photography. So we're going to go through some images here. Feel free to talk anything out, what you shot it with, that any stories that come to mind, or the like.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's me. That's a self-portrait from, I think, 2019, when I was over in Japan, and I was just walking along, and JR, the street artist and photographer, I think he was doing a massive sort of installation piece at I think a train station, and was walking past, and had my photo taken for it. And then as they printed it out, I was obviously going to take a photo of that being rolled up, and yeah, that was just a little self-portrait I thought I'd send you just in case you wanted to use it.
It's awesome. I think everybody needs one of those.
This is the reason I got into photography. This is the book that I was given as an 8-year-old boy from my uncle, and I say on my workshops, it's a little bit of a strange present to give an 8-year-old boy, because it's all about vandalism. But what that did for me was really, I suppose, trigger, wanting to get out there on the street and take pictures. And yeah, that's where it all started. And just the other day, I was walking through Wynwood Walls in Miami, and bumped into Martha Cooper and introduced myself and said hi, and that was a bit of a thrill. So 36 years later, you meet your hero.
That's awesome. And there you go.
That's me, man, as a little 8-year-old boy back in Melbourne in 1986. And so I'd go out on weekends and school holidays, and my mum would drive me around, and we'd go out hunting for, whenever there was a new graffiti piece that had sort of popped up. And yeah, that's just another sort of origin picture of how it all started.
I love it. It's so similar. My mother was a huge graffiti fan, and I think it was ingrained in me as well. So that was one of the other ways I connected with your work. It was personal for me.
Yeah. This is one of my first pictures. As I mentioned, I spent 10 years documenting, the graffiti walls around Melbourne. And as you can see, this is it's a terrible photo. It's out of focus, but it's, it's shot through a wire fence. It's the viewpoint of a little 8-year-old boy. A lot of the other photographers that were documenting the graffiti around that time would have, got a lot closer to the wall. But as a little 8-year-old boy, I was, as you can see, quite removed from it. But looking at this work now, it's sort of, it's got a little bit of historical context with some of the old advertising signs and parts of buildings from around Melbourne that are no longer there. So this is actually the work that I'm working on with the publisher for the new book next year. So it's publishing all that early work.
I'd be happy with this as a 42-year-old man, let alone 8-year-old. And I think you hit on something there that, again, to bring Matt up, one of the things that Matt has talked about is these things that place. I mean, I remember Matt posted an image, and he had either cropped out or didn't get the street sign in there, and the corner had changed. And he was like, I just hear his voice in my head, I wish I knew what corner this was on. I can't remember what block this was. The block has changed. And you start to think about all the things that certain photographers will keep out of their images, or they'll shoot it a certain way where, I don't like that billboard in there. If it's not something that's ironic or that plays into the image somehow, you crop it out. And you look at this, and it's like, even that old Mazda billboard with the old Mazda logo, it's like just stuff like that. The tags on the wall are stuff that you look at it, and it just shows you how well street photography wears over time. I think it's one of the few things that appreciates the longer you get away from the moment.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And it's something I've been guilty of in my own work, probably since I've started shooting color, in that I sort of deliberately don't kind of shoot landmarks in my work a lot. I sort of try to, remove it in camera, and not often shoot in those sort of places that kind of clearly, give away where I am. And I think, I suppose when you look back at older work and you see pictures with, like you said, the tags and the old advertising poster, it does give it, that sense of time and place and history, which, looking at Matt's work, he's been a real inspiration as well, seeing, the sheer volume of work that he's got from, that period when he was a taxi driver. And yeah, he's a great mate. So
definitely.
This is the book that I did. So I published this book in 2021. I think it was a book that I sort of, during lockdown, I was in Melbourne. I think we had 185 days of lockdown. I think it was a world record. So I had a bit of time on my hands, and during that period, I sort of went back through all the earlier black and white work that I'd done when I was sort of first starting off. So it was all Melbourne from, sort of 1997 to 2004. And yeah, this book was from that period, and I wanted to sort of get that work out there in the book form. And this is, the next few photos are sort of from that. So this is, one of the earliest pictures I took as a street photographer. And I remember, I talk about this on my workshops a lot. This is a photo that, I remember seeing these two guys from quite a distance away and running, across the road in the main sort of street in Melbourne, and trying to get into their space but not be seen. And, you know, I didn't want to sort of disrupt that. Sorry, there's a loud car out there. I didn't want to sort of disrupt that beautiful moment and symmetry between the two. So I always look back at this picture, and it sort of brings back memories of that really, I suppose, formative part of you know, being a street photographer and building your confidence out on the street. This one's a multiple exposure. It was an accident. It was double exposure. I don't remember much about this, but it was Anzac Day, and it's a big sort of, you know, event in Melbourne, and all of sort of the war veterans come into the city. And I remember shooting around the city, and I think the double exposure might have even been from the train ride home. So you can see sort of the top left to, you know, 2/3 across is, you know, out the train window. But it's just sort of just a bit of luck again, you know, that we talked about before, that the double exposures kind of worked.
Your composition, just, you know, on these first two images in particular, it just shows that you've always had it. That's one thing, regardless of time, your composition just is always spot on.
This one here, this was the first sort of decent picture I took with a Leica, and it was with a M4P film camera. And, you know, when I was back at photography school, we had, you know, classes, we were being taught about Photoshop, because that was just sort of starting to happen, and portraiture and lighting and all this sort of stuff. And I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to just be out in the city taking street pictures. And I remember this is at the main train station in Melbourne, and I was still, I suppose, coming to grips with, you know, shooting in public and not, you know, I suppose, and shooting candidly is probably the best way of summing it up. And, you know, from memory, this is on the right-hand side of the frame. This is someone's leg, and they're standing up behind me, and I'm sitting down on this ledge, and, you know, still testing myself and finding that confidence, and, you know, obviously using someone's leg as a bit of a shield between me and the subject matter. This is a random one. This is still a bit of a mystery to me. This is, I think I took this back in around 2004, and I was just driving along on the way to a job, and it's just a random thing you sometimes come across. I don't know what she was doing or where she was going, but she was dressed as an angel, and she was walking along this main road in Melbourne. And since the book's come out, a few people have sort of reached out and sort of told me that, you know, they used to see this lady around Melbourne. She'd dress up as an angel and just walk the streets. But I only ever sort of came across her once, and I was pretty lucky to get this picture.
Yeah, thank God you had a camera when you were there. It's perfect. I mean, everything you look at, even just her entire posture, the posture, the way the hand is, the foot, everything's just spot on.
Thank you. This is a bit of a sort of a random story. This was taken in the main kind of, I suppose, the main intersection in Melbourne. And I remember standing on this corner, and just out the corner of my eye, spotting this, you know, this giant painting or this giant face. And, you know, straight away you take a few shots of that. And then, you know, having worked for newspapers, you know, I always have the photo editor's voice in my head saying, you know, you got to get the shot, you've got to get the picture. So I never just take one picture and think I'm done. You know, if it's a scene that allows it, like this did, you know, I follow the guy, and I sort of, I think from memory, I followed him about, you know, 1.5 blocks, took probably 30 or 40 pictures of him. And it turned out he was quite a well-known artist that was, you know, being an artist, he didn't want to sort of spend the money to get the artwork, you know, couriered back to his studio. He thought he'd save $100 by catching a train 60 kilometers to the gallery and picking it up, and then jumping on the train back home with it. And I don't think he was expecting to sort of have a street photographer follow him home for that last part of the journey, because it was quite a well-known painting. And I think his gallery was a little bit upset that there was, you know, a picture out there, you know, on the street of him walking with this expensive painting with no bubble wrap on it. But it's
I love it.
So this is the book, Don't Just Tell Them, Show Them. And this is when I switched to color. So this was a body of work that I started in 2004 and continued on until 2012. And I've recently republished. This is the second edition front cover. So yeah, it's 9 years worth of work, and it's 50 pictures. So from that period of time, I think it was I think there was around 2,000 rolls of film, and
Wow.
over that period of time, the work was, like I talked about earlier, was just, pictures were eliminated as it sort of evolved. And then, you get to that sort of, 7 or 8 year mark of the project, and you think it's probably ready for a book. And then you start to sort of tighten up the edit and look for pictures that work in that sort of that book form. So this is a building site. I don't know where it started, but I started, it was probably after the Wounded project. I started just finding building workers and construction sites of interest. And, whenever I see, guys in high vis out on the street, I always, stop and have a look and try to think if there's a picture here. And this was like a building that was they obviously hadn't finished painting it. And I was driving past one day and I saw the unfinished panels at the bottom where they were testing the color. And that's what first made me sort of stop the car, those blocks of color. And then, you get out of the car, you walk up to it, you take a few shots of just that. And then you start noticing that there's this window into this building site. And then you notice the worker. And then, the challenge then becomes trying to sort of take an interesting photo of him at work with all amongst this kind of, colorful composition and graphic scene. And then, then it's like just trying to get that right moment as well, where he's got the shovel and he's flipping that soil off. And, yeah, so that's a picture that I suppose kind of when I, mentioned earlier about, combining those elements, graphics, color, and, that human element within the frame, doing something interesting. That's for me, probably the picture that I suppose sums it up best, that approach.
Yeah, everything. I mean, it's one that it plays tricks with your mind. And I always say a great image takes you on a trip around the image. It makes you want to look at it more, and it brings a sense of curiosity. There's one thing to look at an image and be like, what am I looking at? But I love when I look at an image and I'm like, wait, what? Hold on. Is that a print on there? Is that a window? What am I looking at? And it's like you have this scene and then you have the duct tape across, but the duct tape is in line with everything, and just the part of it that's peeled off. Everything is so engaging. It really just draws you in. I remember looking at this and I zoomed it in instantly like 400 times to really get a look at what was going on here. It's just such a cool image.
Thank you. Yeah, so all this work was shot with the M6, which is the camera that I used for that period from sort of 2004 to 2013 or so. This one, yeah, this is a I suppose a picture that's really worked really well for me. It's graphic, and it's that color and yellow has been a sort of a recurring theme in my work. And this is a building site that I'd driven past, probably 50 or 60 times. It was pretty close to where I live, and every time I'd sort of be on my way home at that time of day, I'd always just make a detour down this street just to see how the yellow wall was looking. And for those probably first 50 times that I'd driven past it, it was just the yellow wall. There was nothing else really happening. And I didn't go and unscrew that stop sign as well, in case you're wondering. But one day I drove past, the stop sign had fallen and the workers were there, and they were basically just, picking up there was a pile of those, yellow sheets of timber, and they were just picking them up and, walking them back to the truck and putting them on the back of the truck. And for me, I got out of the car and, it was all kind of coming together. And I then just stood on that corner and just photographed it as they did their thing. And that was kind of the backstory with that one. So this is an earlier photo from the color period that I think it was from 2004. And, with this picture, this is actually where I got the title of the book from. And this was a tram that I used to see going up and down like the main street of Melbourne. And the guy that's in the photo at the bottom, he was a busker that I used to see around the city a lot, and he used to play the violin. And so I kind of had my eye on this tram, and I'd always say to myself, if I see it, I'm going to try and get a decent picture of it. And so I saw it coming down the street. I sort of got into position, and then, as just it happens sometimes, this guy who I also knew from shooting around the city a lot, I think he'd either got off the tram or he was walking past, and he stepped up onto the footpath from the road, and me being sort of 6'2", and being in the position I was able to get that angle and just take some pictures. I think there's probably 6 or 7 pictures in this sequence, as he sort of walked, through and stepped up onto the footpath. And, it's the one where the composition's clean and everything's kind of working, and it's simple. That becomes the picture that ends up in the book.
Composition's absolutely perfect. I mean, I'm looking at it as you're talking, I'm looking at just the littlest details. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate most about street photography. And like you said earlier, those really rewarding shots where this isn't even my image and I'm sitting over here and I'm like, damn, this is good. Like, you really nailed like every little detail compositionally about it is just perfect.
Thanks, man. This is another photo I often show when I'm doing my workshops, and I always, tell people that this was nearly a missed opportunity, because I was walking up a street in the city, and I saw this group of workers carrying this giant piece of glass from through the street, and I was 100 meters away, and I missed it, and I ran, and I sort of tried to get close enough to be able to capture it. Completely missed it, and I'm standing on this street corner, annoyed at myself for just being in the wrong time, wrong place, sort of thing. And then I looked back at the truck that they'd come from, and then I think I counted there was still 3 sheets of glass on the truck. So, straight away I said to myself, well, chances are they're going to be coming back for those next few sheets. I'm just going to stand on this corner and wait for them. And I think from memory, this is probably like the last sheet, because you can see the guy on the second from the left he's onto me. He's worked out that I'm not there photographing that building behind them. I'm photographing them. But yeah, that's the story for that one.
I was laughing at this one because when I first looked at it, I'm like, they're all posing. I didn't see the glass. I started working my eye around it and I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, but it's so cool. Just the little things for me, like the handwriting on the glass, just little details like that. The cigarette in the hand. It's like the little stuff that you don't initially, your eye, like my eye starts at this one and it starts going around. And I've always been a big fan of micro composition. The fact that there's every piece just fits in, from the 2 guys all the way on the left edge of the frame to the 2 guys in the middle, kind of between the foreground and the background. There's the way that you have it where everything's just kind of laid in like puzzle pieces always just amazes me. And I think it's such a sign of someone who really has a great eye, who has patience and really has an eye for that moment.
Thanks. This is a photo that I took in. So we're switching from M6 now to digital. So I switched to the Q and been shooting with the Q system since 2015 when it first came out. And this is one of the spots that I always return to in Melbourne. This is the Big Melbourne Cup Spring Carnival horse racing festival that's on. And, it's that combination of color and people dressed up and amazing hats and, at the right time of day in that afternoon sun. This is just a lady sort of walking through one of the marquees of the races. And, straight away you spot the hat, and that's what I'm drawn to, that graphic hat that she's wearing. And then, you start to look, 20 meters down in the direction that she's walking. You see that there's a background that works, and it's simple. And there's, blocks of sort of darkness, and, the hat might be contrasted, with that backdrop. So it's all about kind of, moving and moving quickly as she sort of walks through this marquee that she's in at the horse racing.
Yeah, and I love it. Like you were saying, you're able to take what would normally be a busy scene, or if it's photographed the wrong way, it would be busy and distracting. And you take all these elements and just the way everything is methodically put in place.
Yeah, this one here, this is a picture that another one that I always sort of use as an example on the workshops when I'm doing my sort of introduction. This is a photo that I nearly didn't take because I actually had left my camera in the glove box of the car, and I was driving home one day, and I stopped at this petrol station to get some milk, and I thought, there's no chance of me taking a picture in this 30 meters between where I've parked to going in to get the milk. Don't need my camera. And as I walked past this, this beautiful red wall with the sawtooth roof and the afternoon sun and the blue sky, this guy had broken down and his car was overheating, and there was steam coming out of the engine, and the bonnet was up and the radiator fluids spilt out, and I missed it. I was an idiot. I didn't have my camera, so I ran back to the car, and I don't run very often, but I sprinted, grabbed the camera from the glove box, and walked back through. This was a picture that's probably slightly different to a lot of the other photos I take these days, where I labor over the composition. This was a photo that I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't going to sort of stop for too long here and try to get everything lined up. It had to be quick. He wasn't in the mood, and I sort of took a couple of frames and walked off, and then got my milk. And then it turns out, I always say Melbourne's quite a sort of big small town. This photo was published on the front cover of LFI, I think, last year, and it turns out the guy in the picture was actually someone that used to work at Leica Australia, and he reached out to the boss and said, geez, it's a nice photo, but he could have got me when my car wasn't broken down. So it's nice to sometimes find out the backstory to some of the people in your pictures, but just random moment.
That's awesome.
Yeah, this one, I took this in, I think, 2020 or 2019. This was it's like a stairwell in Tokyo, and I was over there, and I was out one night. I don't shoot a lot at night. I'm sort of drawn to more sort of strong light and those graphic elements when I'm doing this sort of work. But took my camera with me this night and walked past this stairwell and saw this backlight, and obviously that's what sort of drew me to it. And then the challenge then became, waiting for that right silhouette, that person that was close enough to the window that created that shape. And I think from memory, I was standing there for probably, half an hour, 40 minutes, just photographing every single person that walked up that stairwell. And, in the end, I got it. And that's that sort of effort that, I put into some of these pictures, that can be standing there at 10 o'clock at night in a foreign country trying to get a picture.
No wonder what those are the images that mean the most. It's like you're putting in that work, whereas some people are just like, man, if it's not there when I walk by, I'm not waiting for it.
Yeah, this one, this is just a leaf on a car bonnet, and I was working on a commercial job in Sydney, working for an architect, and I'd gone off for a bit of a lunch break, and always have my personal camera with me as well. And I'm walking past and I see this blue leaf, this leaf sitting on the car bonnet. It's midday, so there's there's no shadows coming off it. It's just looking perfect. And I took a few frames of this, and I'm leaning over this car bonnet, and then I start to really fixate about trying to make one end of that leaf touch that reflection of the building on the left hand side, and then I get that right, and then I then start fixating about trying to get the other end touching that shadow of the reflection of the lamppost. And it's one of those photos that talking about laboring over photos, this is probably the one that I sort of think back and I think about the most when I think about that process. The funny thing that happened was I didn't realize, but there was actually a lady sitting in the car, and she toots her horn and she sticks her head out the window and she says, "What are you doing? I need to go. Can you move?" And I'd been leaning over a bonnet for probably, a good 10 minutes trying to get this composition right. And it was quite a little awkward moment, but, I was happy that I ended up getting it.
I love it.
So this is shot with the Q3. This is a recent picture. And this is a spot that I sort of, I gravitate towards down in sort of not far from where I live, and it's sort of along a train line, and just go for an afternoon drive when the light's really low and hitting it, and just this wall. And the day that I went past, there was this construction happening on a building behind me, and you're sort of drawn to the yellow at the bottom, and then the cone, and then you notice the chain, kind of yellow chain. And then you start waiting for someone. I'm sitting there, crouched down, waiting for, someone on a bike or someone to walk through, and that doesn't happen. And then you start to think of just, all right, well, maybe it's a picture that doesn't have someone in it. and you then just start, playing around with the composition, and that's how that one kind of came about. Yeah, this is a photo that I took, I think that was last year, and this was, like I mentioned earlier, how I've been sort of drawn to construction workers and construction sites. This is a photo that it's a building site, and it's a fence. That's the gate, and they normally put the lock, the chain, through the two triangles. And I suppose what first drew me to this was a combination of the two cutouts, the two triangles, but also the silver graffiti on the wall. And I suppose that links back to my interest as a graffiti photographer. And the first time I saw this, it was quite an overcast day, and there was no picture there. And I said to myself, I'm going to come back out here when, there's blue sky and some little puffy clouds out there, and just try to capture, a more abstract picture. And so, about a month later, I was looking out my back window, and there was a blue sky and little puffy clouds. And I said, I've got nothing on this afternoon. I'm going to drive out to this wall and try to get that picture. And that's what I did. And, the cloud, I suppose, often when you're shooting street stuff, you're waiting for people, to sort of come through and enter the frame. Lately, I've been waiting for clouds to sort of just come in and kind of land in that spot where you want them.
Who's more cooperative, clouds or people?
Well, clouds can, it's a good question. I think clouds don't yell at you. So probably, I'm going to say clouds. Here's another one. This is a recent photo shot on the Q3. And this was me driving through the outback. So driving up from, the middle of Australia to about 600 Ks north. And, I'm driving, and out the corner of my eye at like 100 miles an hour, I spot this, this pile of gravel that's been dumped on the side of the road. And I didn't think anything of it straight away, but it wasn't until about, 1 or 2 Ks up the road, I thought there was something back there, and I've got time. I'm going to go back. So I swung a big U-turn and drove back down. The guy that I was with that was coming along on this job he was hungry. He was wanting to get to the next stop. And I said, no, there was a picture back there. And then, I pulled the car over and then just, framed it up, and then, you start spotting the clouds, and you think, now I just need to wait for them to sort of come through. And that was how that one came about.
How long did you have them waiting?
From memory, it was about maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Okay. So not as long as the leaf on the carb on it, but long enough to annoy my co-worker who was hungry. Yeah, this was a recent picture that I took in Tokyo, and I was there on a workshop with Leica, and this was just one of those kind of scenes you walk past, and you're naturally drawn to this this moment and this thing unfolding in front of you. And then I suppose the challenge as the photographer then becomes capturing that really expressive gesture. And yeah, from memory, I sort of crouched down, or sort of leaning over by the look of my reflection in the window, and shot probably 50 or 60, 70 pictures of these two friends as they just talk to each other. And I then became obsessed about that right gesture, that had that sort of, that is in this picture. And yeah, that's sort of been my approach, trying to sort of get it in camera and walk away knowing that I've got it.
Well, Jesse, look, this has been such a great ride through not just your body of work, but your whole story as a photographer from a youth to where we are today. It's just been a pleasure to sit here and pick your brain and hear what's going on when you're taking these images. What do you have going on, either project wise or Leica Academy wise, coming up?
Yeah, thank you. It's been a busy little period. I've been traveling a lot. I get back from the US this week, and then I'm working on a commercial job. And then next year I've got, a series of workshops coming up in Australia, as well as hopefully coming back over here at some stage. So yeah, it's just going to be another busy year, and working on that book that I talked about earlier, of the earlier work. So yeah, things are sort of certainly busy at the moment.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank you again on behalf of Leica for coming on and joining us. And for those of you who haven't caught up on the rest of our Leica Stories series, you can head over to YouTube to look up B&H Event Space. And you can find all of our wonderful interviews there with the rest of our recorded live content. Jesse, can't thank you enough. I want to send a huge thank you to the Leica team for putting me in contact with you. And look, check out for any workshops that Jesse has coming up around the world. And also support all of our artists. There's books out there available for purchase. Please do support our artists. Jesse, any closing words, man?
No, I'd just like to thank Leica US for the opportunity to be over here for the workshop and the exhibition, and the opportunity to chat with yourself. It's been great, man. I bought my first camera from you guys back in 1997. So yeah, it's that full circle moment, like doing a chat 25 years later. It's great. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, man. A huge thank you to you and to all of our viewers out there tuning in. Can't do it without you. We do it for you guys, but that's it. Another edition of the B&H virtual event space in the books. Catch y'all next time.